January 1998. The story broke a week ago and has been on every front cover of every national print. The story says that the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, has conducted an affair with an intern almost half his age. As sordid details bubble from every corner of the media, the public bay for an official response from the White House. President Clinton would face the cameras on January 26th and commit to a lie that would forever tarnish his legacy. Since ancient times, there have been numerous writings on Roman and Chinese emperors, Egyptian pharaohs, and their love lives. The suggestion of many is that only those with a certain magnitude of ego and grandiosity are likely to gravitate towards positions of power, and with that comes a considerable libido. No matter the exact reason behind this, it would appear many Western leaders are no different to their counterparts from antiquity. But why? The audacity and appetite for transgression, for trampling boundaries, or disregard for rules is far from limited to the sexual. The 1970s showed us a US president who felt he was above the law, and the last president has shown us a glib ignorance to conflicts of interest. Prime ministers of modern-day Britain have shown personal enrichment in office despite glaring ethical and procedural flaws. Why do our most powerful figures indulge the very worst impulses? Western democracies have traditionally held themselves aloft with moral certainty and superiority. Yet from France to Canada, from Italy to Britain and America, our leaders have so often shown the opposite. Join us as we delve into the history of a mystifying and vexing side of Western democracies, the indulgent, excesses, flaws, and sordid amusements of their leaders. Welcome to History on Fleek, the garment that rocked the White House. Bill Clinton's Lewinsky scandal of the late 90s is arguably the biggest scandal of its kind ever conducted by a Western leader. Beginning in 1995, President Bill Clinton engaged in an extramarital affair with a 22-year-old White House intern, Monica Lewinsky. The affair would end in 1997, but the entire time, Lewinsky had revealed details over the telephone to co-worker Linda Tripp, who recorded their conversations. Clinton himself would infamously declare in front of the television cameras,
"I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky."
Sadly for the country and himself, everyone could kind of tell he was lying. The president would be found guilty of perjury and impeached for lying under oath and obstructing justice. Clinton would avoid impeachment by a thin margin and serve his remaining term, but his legacy was terminally tarnished. The Clinton-Lewinsky scandal has had a Me Too retrospective, particularly concerning the power dynamics in play. Clinton's promiscuous past has also been given a retrospective review, and it's hardly glowing. Not to mention the coldly legal approach to his cross-examination. Clinton would also be remembered for his response to cross-examination. It depends upon what the meaning of the word is. François Hollande's not-so-hidden hijinks. François Hollande has the unfortunate banner of being the most unpopular president of the French Fifth Republic. He would lead his country across his 5-year term through the Charlie Hebdo shootings, where his popularity would rise to 40%, though it never stayed there and was last polled as a single digit. The French president likely did his popularity no favors when he was caught having an extramarital affair while in office. Quite fantastically, the affair was barely hidden. Just 300 meters from the Élysée Palace, Hollande was spotted being dropped off on a scooter to an apartment frequently. In a touch of pure comedy, the French president figured just a motorcycle helmet was likely all the cover he needed for an incognito disguise. It was revealed Hollande was having an affair with actress Julie Gaillet, which led to a public breakup with his then-partner Valérie Trierry-Walliard. Hollande would marry Gaillet in 2022. Trierry-Walliard would release a book about their relationship, and it wasn't all complimentary. Berlusconi's Bunga Bunga. Without a doubt, the modern Western leader most embroiled in this particular type of scandal was Silvio Berlusconi. The Italian media tycoon would become Prime Minister of Italy on 3 separate occasions. However, despite his enormous wealth and continuous decades-long relationship with power, Berlusconi was nothing short of a walking scandal magnet, and most notoriously for his love life. The Italian Prime Minister was embroiled in ever-growing allegations of throwing lavish parties with prostitutes at his private villa, called Bunga Bunga parties. Allegedly, the term originates from Muammar Gaddafi, a long-term friend of Berlusconi. But the contents of Bunga Bunga parties are quite outrageous. Floor shows, outfits, multiple partners, numerous hired participants. All at the private home of the Prime Minister. While exhibiting the appetites and proclivity of a Roman emperor, Berlusconi's instances of excess would go from sordid to criminal. In 2013, he would be banned from holding public office after being found guilty of paying for intercourse with a minor. Incredibly, judges would overturn his 7-year prison sentence just 12 months later on appeal. David Cameron's offshore inheritance. Some Western leaders of these times have faced criticism for their handling of financial matters, raising questions about how appropriate they are to coordinate and handle the use of public funds. The former British Prime Minister, David Cameron, raised eyebrows over financial matters on more than one occasion across his tenure and since. Revealed early in his premiership, Cameron would receive £300,000 in inheritance from his father's estate in 2010. The controversy arose when it was discovered his father had used a series of offshore tax havens in Panama, Jersey, and Geneva to multiply the family wealth. Probably not the best of taste in the wake of a global financial meltdown. It was found that the fund this money came from was not liable for taxation on any of its gains or income. In 2016, when it was revealed both the Prime Minister and his wife had invested in the offshore fund, there were calls for Cameron's resignation. Boris Johnson's extortionate expenses. The use of public money for lavish lifestyles, including expensive homes, cars, or other perks, has proven a point of contention for Western leaders over the years. Fellow former Prime Minister Boris Johnson caught public ire for a series of snowballing scandals during his tumultuous tenure. One of the most blatant was his choice and amount of funding for the renovation of his Downing Street residence. What several tabloid reports would label Wallpapergate, it was revealed the Prime Minister had privately inquired whether donors within the Conservative Party would cover the charges for the renovation. Incredibly, the Prime Minister was granted a £30,000 a year grant to spend on the number 10 abode. But this wasn't quite enough for the lavish taste of Boris Johnson. The Electoral Commission would uncover through their investigation that the total cost of the refurb was a whopping £200,000, and the expenses included 225-pound rolls of wallpaper. A sign of the cronyism the Johnson years were mired in, Lord Geit, the Prime Minister's advisor on standards, had previously cleared him of foul play. The Conservative Party would be fined £17,800 for their part. As for excess of over £150,000 spent on a Prime Minister's abode, now, who paid for that? Watergate and the fall of Richard Nixon. Even the most stable of Western democracies have seen revelations unfold that have rocked them. Scandals involving corrupt practices have brought a profound change in conduct and attitude between institutes and the general public at large. In the early 1970s, U.S. democracy was rocked in a way never seen before in modern times, with the Watergate scandal. In 1972, a campaign of illegal activity against the Democratic Party was conducted under the auspices of President Richard Nixon. 5 men were hired to break into the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate office complex, photograph documents, and place wiretaps on phones. The Nixon administration would be embroiled in controversy as it consistently attempted to obstruct the investigation into the matter and cover up the administration's involvement. Staggeringly, Nixon had a voice-activated recording system during his time in the Oval Office, and his complicity, particularly in the cover-up, was on them. When articles of impeachment on 3 separate accounts were drawn up by the House of Representatives and the tapes were made public, Nixon was done for. On August 9, 1974, Richard Nixon resigned as President of the United States, the only president to have ever done so. It can be argued that, among the Vietnam War, the economic downturn of the decade, and this scandal, American optimism in its politics and institutions was never the same. Donald Trump's brand, businesses, and entwined interest. Among all the scandals, failings, and impropriety of Western leaders, conflicts of interest are among the most commonly cited as a point of ire for the general public. Instances where leaders or their family members have been accused of using their positions for personal gain are standouts. Step forward, Donald Trump. The former U.S. president has faced consistent allegations that his separation of office and business is simply not as clear-cut and feasible as he's claimed. A 2020 Watchdog report by Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington amounted to over 3,400 conflicts during his time in office. Over 130 events by special interest groups were held at Trump properties. 141 congressional members visited a Trump business, and the president himself spent a third of his presidency visiting properties on the portfolio. While Trump stated he would not pursue foreign deals during his time in office, foreign governments have granted 67 trademarks to the Trump Organization in this period. White House officials across the presidency promoted Trump businesses some 426 times, and the president himself mentioned his properties 338 times during interviews and speeches. The calling card of public anger The blending of commercial and business interests with matters of government and state appeared alive and well under the Trump administration. Foot-in-mouth disease, poor taste from the powerful. Among the many things public figures and no less Western leaders face laser-like attention for are their statements and remarks. At times, leaders can be caught on a hot mic saying something they didn't know could be heard. Look no further than British Prime Minister Gordon Brown calling a voter bigoted in 2010.
Everything. She just this all bigoted woman said she used to be Labour.
Sometimes, leaders go for a joke that simply isn't a joke or contains any semblance of humor. Look no further than Silvio Berlusconi's consistent remarks on President Obama circa 2009. As for general insensitivity or lack of concern for fallout from one's remarks, a library of tweets from President Donald Trump can still be found online that should give you instances to refer to, particularly the 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. variety. They were usually the most aggravated or spicy. This being said, sometimes leaders are just caught out for history they wished didn't exist. In 2019, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau faced outrage for photos released of his college years wearing blackface. He would apologize and seemingly survive the scandal as he remains in office as of 2023. However, the racist overture of blackface was a painful moment of reckoning with personal moral failure for one of the West's beacons of progressive liberalism. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.